I was watching Smile in the cinema when this confusing and laughably bizarre scene suddenly came up. The man pulled the skin off his face, and the girl in front of him, framed in a medium close-up, started to scream and then lethargically fell to her knees. The audience gasped and cried in terror, appalled by this faintly lit, big-budget cinematography. A lot of money must have gone into this scene, whether they used CGI or not, and I remember saying to myself, wait. This scene kinda reminds me of this scene, which in retrospect kinda reminds me of this scene. All of them are equally terrifying, and all of them are kinda dumb and pointless. Horror movies and horror games have lost their luster, there's no denying it. Relying on gore imagery and cheap jump scares, horror games have turned their backs on the endless possibilities offered by the medium. No one wants to experiment, no one wants to push the medium forward. Developers are stuck in this open-world trend-following loop, and filmmakers are just making generic Conjuring lookalikes. I'm not saying that every movie should be like Visitor Q, oh hell no, but hear me out. Forget about blood, gore, and viscera. Forget about jump scares. Every animal is scared when in danger. I want horror. True horror. Something profoundly human and humanly disturbing. Something that is, as I said in the thumbnail photo, more than gore. For all its scares, blood, and broken dreams, Cry of Fear is still a beautiful and somewhat cathartic experience. It's a game about regeneration and reconstruction. The world is broken, but not beyond repair. Simon, the protagonist, is crushed and broken both physically and mentally, but not beyond repair. Cry of Fear is a psychological survival horror game that started out as a free Half-Life modification, but was eventually released as a standalone product. Heavily inspired by Silent Hill, Take a Shot, and evocative of Schopenhauer's philosophy, especially his take on pessimism and human suffering, Cry of Fear, in its essence, is a story about despair and self-isolation. The physical abnormalities of Cry of Fear's enemies are related to Simon's current state of mind. The monsters are broken, chained to beds and chairs, and unable to walk or even stand up. A line between a helping hand and a monster's claw is blurred, and this little town, which represents Simon's deteriorating mental health, stands barely, in dire need of reconstruction and healing. Within Cosmicism, H.P. Lovecraft attributes total insignificance to humanity, especially highlighted when juxtaposed with the larger universes. All of his narratives, all of his stories are based on a fundamental premise that common human laws, interests, and emotions have no validity or significance in the vast cosmos at large. Bloodborne uses the Dark Souls formula to tell a story about our cosmic insignificance. Long before humans, there were Thumerians, a superhuman civilization that lived in the area of what is now Yharnam. This great civilization then discovered an even greater civilization, the Great Ones, extremely powerful, multidimensional beings that can exist and operate across several planes of existence. Fast forward a few centuries and humans are now at the top of the food chain, but just like Thumerians, they're starting to crave forbidden knowledge and insight. Humans are desperately trying to communicate with these cosmic beings, but to no avail. The limited human brain looks to the sky for answers, but the sky is silent, dark and threatening. Bloodborne is an action-adventure horror RPG developed by From Software and Japan Studio, and its only flaw is that it's a PlayStation 4 exclusive. This horror masterpiece should be available to everyone, no matter how many tentacles. Loneliness truly is a silent killer. It distorts and deforms the lens through which we perceive the world. It turns our joyful sounds into dull echoes and paints everything gray and dark. Lone Survivor is a retro-styled 2D survival horror game that mashes together different themes, genres, and references. Squint your eyes a bit and you can see Twin Peaks, I'm a Legend, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and even Silent Hill: Take a Shot. A devastating biological hazard has ravaged the earth and contaminated our flesh and blood, thus transforming what is left of humanity into mindless zombie-like creatures. The protagonist lives in a building. He survives day by day, scrounges for food, eats and sleeps. And when he sleeps, he dreams about a young girl, about a man with a box on his head. The world is falling into oblivion and the mind struggles to bear the weight of loneliness and isolation. The gameplay is a mixed bag, a weird salad of 2D shooting, boss fights, and stealth sections. At times, it's even a virtual pet simulator. The game blends its weird segments rather nicely to tell this bizarre story about loss, I guess. It's never really explained what the hell happened, but there are implications that the protagonist has lost someone very important to him. Do you remember the first dinner you had with your girlfriend's parents? It probably looked like this, but felt somewhat like this. Do you remember the first time you spoke with her dad? It probably looked like this, but actually felt like this. Have you ever texted someone or talked with another girl while in a relationship? It probably looked like this, but felt like this.
It'll be fine. After we make it, we can get out of here. Together. I'll be waiting for you in the trailer.
Were you ever tempted to choose another girl over your own? It probably looked and felt like this. Resident Evil 7 is a story about a young man on a mission to save his girlfriend from a family of crazed rednecks. I'll try not to overanalyze the implications and keep the segment spoiler-free, but you deal with a family in this order. First, you eliminate Daddy to establish dominance and authority. Then you destroy the old crone, the mother that shoots bees and hornets from her vagina. Then you deal with the girl's younger brother who likes to play games. And after all that, you're tempted by the idea of running away with another girl, equally pretty and desirable as your girlfriend. It's needless to say that Resident Evil 7 is a weird game and a welcome experience after that action-packed nonsense that was Resident Evil 6. The game was indirectly inspired by PT, the cancelled Hideo Kojima revival of the Silent Hill franchise. Take a shot. Here's a fun game. Play the video from the beginning and take a shot every time I mention Silent Hill, and by the end of the video you probably won't be able to walk straight. I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a post-apocalyptic science fiction short story that Harlan Ellison wrote in one sitting. It was published in 1967 and adapted into a point-and-click adventure game in 1995. Ellison wrote the script for the entire game with some help from David Sears, a writer who previously worked as an assistant editor at Compute magazine. The game takes place in a dystopian post-Cold War world where a sentient supercomputer called Allied Master Computer, or AM, has destroyed all of mankind except for 5 people. AM has been keeping alive and torturing these people for the past 109 years. The computer uses their innermost desires and darkest fragments of their past to construct metaphorical narratives in games, all in the service of torturing them even more, and then some more. None of them is flawless. They all have doubts, fears, and mysteries. Gorister has had his wife committed to a mental institution and now feels incredible guilt and despair. He is suicidal and yearns for death, but AM is not letting him go off that easily. At the end of his story, Gorister finally lets go of his past. Ellen was molested inside an elevator by a man wearing a yellow janitor jumpsuit. Now she has severe claustrophobia and is terrified of the color yellow. Naturally, AM uses her past trauma to traumatize her even more. At the end of her story, Ellen faces her fears and learns how to fight back. Benny was a military officer who killed and ate his squad, his soldiers, just because they weren't obedient and good enough. He was a beast, a monster without empathy and compassion, and so AM quite literally turns him into an ape-like creature. At the end of his story, Benny learns how to act as a human being again. He shows compassion and love. Ted was a con artist, a charmer, and a petty thief. In order to tempt him, AM constructs this melodramatic story inside a medieval castle, but Ted manages to resist every possible temptation. He saves the soul of his beloved and beats the devil himself. Yeah, this scenario is kinda weird. The last character, Nimdak, was a Nazi scientist, a disgusting human being responsible for hundreds upon hundreds of deaths. Am, quite symbolically, takes him back to the concentration camp where he used to work. Despite his fragile body and a broken mind, Nimdak manages to reconnect with his spark of humanity. He saves the Jewish captives, repents, and dies at the hand of the monster he had once created. Enigma to Am, enigma to himself. We human beings are pretty interesting. Take away everything we have, burn everything to the ground, torture, crush, break, and you still won't be able to destroy that spark of humanity. Always that wretched spark. The world of Pathologic is the final frontier where reality fails to live up to our moral standards. How can we understand or grasp the essential moral codes that help us rage against the perverse pointlessness of our existence if we're surrounded by death, suffering, disease, and plague? Yes, plague, this is the year 2020 simulator. The town in Pathologic is a dark and mournful place that reeks of discomfort and death. Worms, mimes, executors, and more human-looking townsfolk roam the streets, not once glancing at a strange and non-Euclidean geometry they call a town. Everything in this world is foreign and alien. It's like an evil demiurge dreamed up this place, and there is no framing device to guide you to who the dreamer is. The game calls itself a mime show, even though it's a first-person survival horror with inventory management, shooting sections, and branching narratives. You play as one of the 3 suggested protagonists, the Bachelor, the Changeling, and the Harrispex, and they all have different ideas on how to deal with the plague. HBOMBERGUY made an amazing video on Pathologic, so if you're interested in the game, I'll put a link in the description. Where do you even start with Silent Hill 2, the most impactful horror game ever made? What should I say first? Should I talk about how monsters are just a physical manifestation of James's deranged mind? Should I mention how side plots are thematically linked to the main story? What about this scene, an intelligent reference to the movie Blue Velvet? And this scene framed in such way that shows James imprisoned inside the room while Maria is actually the one behind bars. Silent Hill 2 is without a doubt the best and the scariest horror game ever made. It's not a perfect game, the combat is janky and the voice acting is kind of dull and weird, but it is profound. It is humanly disturbing and profoundly human. The music is best in the business and the story is soul-crushingly sad. It is the pinnacle of horror game design and writing. Even Konami couldn't kill Silent Hill 2, and Konami's killed a lot of things. And with a remake recently announced, there's never been a better time to play or replay this horror magnificence. Thanks for watching.